Our second speaker is Megan Sanford. Megan received a BA in history from the University of Providence and currently works as the archives administrator in the Great Falls History Museum. In her talk, Stories of Great Falls Breweries, Megan will discuss the rich history of the brewing industry in Great Falls, including stories of immigrant families, a missing brewmaster, and scientific controversies. Megan, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Morning, everybody. So this has been a pet project for mine for about 5 years now. And we did a whole exhibit on it, and the exhibit was up for 2 years. And now you're going to hear me tell you all about it because I really love this subject. So Great Falls has had quite the history with breweries from the very beginning of the city to today. Our first brewery was the Volk Brothers Brewery. Started in 1891. It was at a location that they called Great Falls Park. All that's left there, unfortunately, now is the part of the wall along the bottom. The rest of the building is all gone at this point. But let me tell you about the family that started this. Carl and Barbara Volk came from Germany and ended up in Alexandria. Oops, I forgot one thing. Notes. I could probably wing it pretty good, but let's find out. So Carl and Barbara Volk came from Germany. They settled in Alexandria, Minnesota. And the family started 3 breweries and had them there. And they had 6 children, and they said, kids, go west. So Christian and Nick, 2 of their sons, came to Great Falls, and they created what was the Great Falls Volk Brothers Brewery. Like I said, they started in 1891. The brewery lasted until 1896. Unfortunately, one October night, there was a fire somewhere in the loft area, the top part of the brewery. Nick Volk ran in, saved the watchman that was asleep, and got him out of the building in time before it all burned down. At that point, the brothers decided not to rebuild. Christian went back to Alexandria, and Nick stayed here and homesteaded just north of town in an area called Benton Lake. And then he opened what was called the People's Meat Market and sold what he grew there. But this was not the end of the Volk family and their brewery history with Great Falls. After Prohibition, Charles, who was the son of Christian, decided that he wanted to have his own brewery too. Charles decided to go to Chicago and went to the Hennius Brewing Institute and learned his trade while also getting some insider knowledge from his family. He opened the Volk Brewery in 1935. Now, this brewery was kind of neat. At the time, it was the most compact brewery in the entire United States. It was only occupied a 28 by 50-foot space. I mean, that's pretty small for a brewery at the time. And this thing was so revolutionary for the time that he got a 3-page spread in the June issue of the Brewers Journal of Chicago. The brewery did fantastic. Was able to hold out through the war and all of that. Volk, though, however, decided that he wanted to expand more nationally. He sold out to National Brewers in 1948, but unfortunately, the plant did close in 1951. Okay, this is my favorite brewery because this building is fantastic. Have you ever seen anything more castle-like? This is right on the edge of the river. Currently, the spot is occupied by the federal courthouse that is now here in town, which is really a shame because I love this building. Luckily, somebody decided to do a souvenir booklet of about 7 photos of the inside of this brewery, and it is fantastic. What they described in it was that the process started in the brewing rooms with the kettles, mash tub, and cold water tanks of 150 barrel capacity. From there, the newly made beer was pumped to the 6th story into a vast iron tank where it was cooled. Then down to the 5th floor, it passed over copper coils through which percolated refrigerating fluid. It then descended further to the fermenting vats and then to the storage vats. The storage vats are 12 feet high and 8 feet in diameter, holding 100 barrels each and made from the finest California redwood. And you can see those vats right there. Those are fantastic. It's very clean and very well organized for such a large brewery. Okay. So the most exciting part about the Montana brewery is what we call the case of the missing brewmaster. In 1899, well, let me back up. So the brewery started in 1893. And as you know, when businesses start, it takes them a little while to get financially stable and all of that kind of stuff. Well, by 1899, the Montana brewery was doing quite well. They had Joseph Trimborn, who was their brewmaster. He went to school in Germany, came over to the United States, worked in some other breweries around the country before becoming the brewmaster here. What happens, though, is in 1899, Gertrude Trimborn takes their children in March and goes back to Germany to put them into school because they wanted them to learn in Germany. And then she lets her husband know that she will be back roughly around May 2nd and to pick her up in New York. So Joseph goes April 30th and gets to the Grand Hotel in New York, checks in, leaves some money in the safe there, and then goes for a walkabout. May 2nd arrives, and he's not waiting for Mrs. Trimborn at the dock. She goes to the hotel and finds out he never came back from his walk. But so there was a lot of curiosity of what happened to him, and they never really found out. So the wife went back to Great Falls, settled all the craziness to do with her husband, and then went back to Germany to be with her kids. Flash forward, it's 1983. Professor Raymond Walters, a professor of criminal justice at the College of Great Falls, is working on his doctoral thesis, and he comes across an article about this particular disappearance. He got interested and looked into Trimborn. And as you can see, he did give a talk and talked about everything that he came up with. His wife, Linda, did all the drawings. And what he decided, from what he found, was most likely Trimborn was murdered while he was in New York. There was possibility of pieces of him being found in the river after he had been possibly attacked, which was very unfortunate. The reason I like this story so much is we have the original write-up, we have all the original drawings and everything at the museum I work at. We put this all up on our blog. Well, in August of, I want to say 2021, 2022, after all the COVID scare, the family that was still in Germany saw our blog and came to the museum to find out what happened to their relative. They never knew what happened to him. So this small family in Germany came all the way here to just say thank you for putting that up. They were kind enough to bring this photo of Mr. Trimborn, which we didn't have at the time. So it's incredible how some of these stories come back around later. One of the other things, so the state of Montana decided to go into prohibition a year earlier. So they started in 1918. Once in 1919, federal law kicks in and we have prohibition for the whole country. And there was a huge fight about whether beer should be included in the prohibition. Usually the big fight was for all of the hard liquors. Well, during that fight, we discovered new things like cereal beer and near beer and beer alternatives. Uh, well, what happens is both of the breweries, of course, are not producing what they wish they were. Sorry, both. We haven't gotten to the Anaconda yet. But the Montana brewery kept producing near beer and cereal beer. Well, in 1922, after an investigation of 2 months, the Prohibition Office and their deputized officers come in and arrest the owners of the Montana brewery, seize the plant, seize the equipment, and seize all the beer that's there right now. Apparently, they had been producing a new unmarked bottle that was suggested to be their new cereal beer, which a cereal beer is supposed to be 0.5 alcohol or less. And they had been finding distributed among the communities of North Montana beer that was somewhere around 4%. And it was all traced back to the Montana brewery. Well, both W.H. Jensen and Fred Johnson, who were the owners, were both arrested and claimed to know nothing about this, of course. And then what originally was supposed to happen was the Attorney General of the state of Montana, Wellington Rankin, wanted to lead the raid himself, but could not. But he said about the Montana Brewing Company, whose daring undertaking makes the work of rum runners, moonshiner, and bootleggers to appear as kindergarten stuff. During the trial, though, of all of this happening, there was a wide margin of error on the tests that were happening. Their chemist was saying, oh, these samples are testing between 0.66 and 4, and that's kind of a wide margin of error. If you've ever brewed beer or checked into some of that, it doesn't get that wide of a difference, especially if you're using the same equipment each time and each measurements. So the case was dismissed. But unfortunately, due to fines and other financial issues, the brewery did close. Our other brewery at the time was the American Brewery. It started in 1895, and at the time, it was the largest in the state, and it had an ice machine. Now, one of their favorite arguments to make during the fight against Prohibition was that beer was a food. Like I said, there was a movement to try and keep beer separated from the harder liquors. And by saying it was food, it's liquid bread, right? It gives you calories, nutrients, and hydration. And another real argument for beer versus hard alcohol is when you're in the Wild West, think of what your water sources are a lot of the time, the Missouri River, lakes, whatever you find. Well, let me tell you, the beer would definitely be a lot cleaner than the water you're drinking. In fact, when I was looking at this time, yes, Great Falls did have a water treatment plant, and they were getting that going underway. But at this time, it was still not unusual to find articles in the newspaper saying, please stop dumping your animal carcasses in the river. We're trying to have a clean and healthy city here. But that did happen every once in a while. The American Brewery, like the Montana, did try to run cereal beer. Again, that didn't work really well. And then Montana had a weird thing for a while where they argued that cereal beer was still under Prohibition law, not legal. So it was kind of a weird struggle. But in the end, the American plant became a bottling plant for lemon, lime, and orange crush soda. It was always kind of funny to see those. All right, the one that everybody knows and loves, Great Falls Select. Most of you probably still remember this. I apologize, I'm too young to have ever tried Great Falls Select, but I was told that it was more likely to be known as Great Falls Shellac. So kind of what happened is Prohibition's coming to an end. And we've got these lovely plants that were already still there, still sitting around, still waiting to be used. And a gentleman from Canada named Emil Sick purchased both the American and the Montana breweries. And he combined them to become Great Falls Brewery Incorporated. One became the bottling plant, one became the malting plant. Let's see. One of the other kind of fun things with this too is Sick brought in some of the sons from the Montana Brewing Company, so W.S. Johnson and Jensen are lovely prohibition ignorers. Oops. But anyway, this took off like crazy. If you were coming into the state, you probably all saw Monty the cowboy waving at you on a billboard. And it was everywhere. It grew to reach 4 different states. It was distributed in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Idaho. And it did well for quite a while. Sick sold his interest in the company in 1949, just his financial interest, but he still thought that Great Falls Select was a great product and that it would keep going. Another one of those little side note things. These are paintings by Les Peters. Some of you may recognize them. They were painted in 1951 for the Great Falls Breweries, and then they were used as prints and sold all over the place. They were probably hanging in every bar in the state at one point. Different animals, of course. There were a total of 6 paintings. And in 1968, they gave all 6 of those paintings to the Great Falls Public Library. There are still 5 of them here. One was apparently stolen a few years ago, but all 5 of them are still, the other 5 are still here. They're currently on display at the History Museum. But unfortunately, this was one of the last beautiful acts that the brewery was able to do. So, as we all know, as time went on, the game changed and finances were rather difficult. If you weren't a big boy that survived Prohibition, you had a hard time competing. Like Anheuser-Busch and them had the capital, they had the buildup, and they still had the followers that they had to start again in the 30s. It was announced in July of 1968 that the plant would be closing. And after I knew I was going to be after Rich, I found this quote that I thought was really kind of funny. When they made the announcement to the workers, this was in the Great Falls Tribune, quote, "The general reaction was one of shock. It left us speechless. You might put it this way. If a man had been working at the smelter all his life and it suddenly closed down, his work there would be the only thing he knew." Sadly, ironic words for a decade later. But yeah, it was a huge industry. I mean, should back up too a little bit. When we got rid of breweries during Prohibition, that was a huge mistake. And Montana did try to realize that. They tried to repeal Prohibition in 1926, but you can't win against federal law. But this was an industry that employed hundreds of workers, took on tons of farmers' grain and everything a lot easier than if you don't have to ship it if it's being sold here. And they were paying taxes to the county. Well, in 1968, it's another industry that's gone from Montana. This, in fact, was the last brewery to close down in the state. On August 31st was the last day that the men worked in the plant. These are, in fact, photos taken by Ralph Pomlikowski by the Tribune. We got very lucky to get his photos, but these are all ones that weren't used in the paper of the last day. Men on hand when the last shift ended work at the Great Falls Breweries at 2:30 Friday afternoon could be likened to mourners standing at the graveside of a close friend. They sometimes stand around in the hope of flavoring or prolonging unexplainable bonds of friendship, good times, or just simple loyalty. These men did that. Some cried, some were tipsy, some quietly walked to their cars. With the closing of this brewery was a closing of a very large era, not just for us, but for the state of Montana. An industry that had provided money across the state, provided a source for farmers to distribute their goods, was suddenly gone. But it's not all doom and gloom. The industry of beer has changed. The first microbrewery sprung up in California in 1976, and it was the beginning of a new era. The first brewery in Cascade County was Harvest Moon Brewery in Belt that opened in 1998. And soon after, we've had several others. We have Jeremiah Johnson, which was originally known as The Front, the Black Eagle Brewery, and the Mighty Mo Brewery. And I would encourage you, not just because drinking beer is fun, but because each one of these has something about their area that's part of what they're making. Harvest Moon Brewery grows their own hops out in Belt. They also have specific labels, Charlie Russell Red, and a few others that showcase what Cascade County and Great Falls is about. Jeremiah Johnson has Mountain Man. The Black Eagle Brewery specifically has the Save Our Stack IPA. And then the Mighty Mo has Dam Fog and a few others. Just because when you get to go to these breweries, you get an idea of what the people think of their area, the tastes that you can get here. And that was one of the things that Great Falls Select always boasted too, was using the Missouri River water. But I hope you all enjoyed my beer talk.